in the last few weeks, there was a D&D celebration with the 50th anniversary of D&D coming up. 50 years, and I've been at this for a good 40 of it. The 50th anniversary of D&D coming up, and they had a bunch of D&D celebration blog posts and website information and YouTube channel. On the official YouTube channel, there was a video that sort of spoke about what is on the horizon for 5e D&D. What's coming? What's coming soon? Maybe this year, early next year, and beyond. Looking forward, right? Sort of hashing through the speculation. Is there a 6th edition on the horizon? So on and so forth. Now, if you've already digested that video, I'm going to talk about the points that were brought up in that video, but I think more importantly, to give you some value to this particular video, I'll give you my thoughts on it. And again, these are my opinions. Every single table is not only allowed to, but encouraged to play D&D the way, whatever the way you to play it how you want, in whatever edition you want. To also choose not to play D&D at all. Play Pathfinder. Play something way out there, Starfinder, or whatever you want to do. Play and have fun at your table any way that you see fit. So here we go. Let's just break down what was in that video and what I took from it, and here's my thoughts on it all. They talked about exploring the D&D multiverse. Ravenloft has already been released. We saw that with Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and of course there's already been stuff since the beginning of 5e with Curse of Strahd. And then there are 2 more classic D&D settings that are being released next year. And they will be published in formats that have never been used before. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to what those settings are, right? If we're talking about classic D&D settings, I mean, there's only a certain list that we can pull from, right? They've already done a lot with Forgotten Realms, right? But one thing I did find, I did a little bit of detective work in Google Foo, and on the official Wizards of the Coast website, there was an article called Travelers of the Multiverse, and it's an unearthed arcana thing, where if you click on it, you can download a PDF, and what I found was this. Travelers of the Multiverse. And there's Astral, this is by Christopher Perkins and Jeremy Crawford, so the cream of the crop. If it's going to come from the horse's mouth, or whatever that statement is, these are the legit guys, right? There's an Astral Elf, Autognome, Gif, Hadazee, Plasmoid, and Thri-kreen that has been put out there, unearthed arcana, so this is not official, right? Hasn't been thoroughly play-tested where they're stamping it in a book, but they're putting it out there. And I feel like whenever they do this, they're sort of dipping their toe in the waters and seeing what sort of feedback they get, because they're planning on using this somewhere else, which does hint to the following. In looking up, I didn't know what some of these were, or I don't remember what they were. In looking up the Gif and the Plasmoid and the Hadazee, these are all things that came about and are spoken about in Spelljammer, which is a classic setting. So does that mean the 2 that are coming out next year, one of them is Spelljammer? Perhaps. So far, this leads to that more than any other hints that are out there, right? And then you have the Thri-kreen, which I believe was brought about in Athis, in Dark Sun. That is another classic setting. They have announced, right? They didn't say exactly which ones, but 2 classic settings are being re-released or coming out in a never-before-seen format for 5th edition D&D, just as they did with Ravenloft. I venture to guess that it will be Spelljammer and Dark Sun. There's been a lot of talk about how Dark Sun can be done with the direction that WotC has gone, with the direction that the world has gone, with all of the cancel culture and don't be offensive and everyone finding some damn reason to be bothered by something. And Dark Sun, are you just going to, WotC designers, or are they going to leave it up to the DM with a paragraph that says hand wave it, tread lightly, find your safe places? Because Dark Sun can definitely push the wrong buttons, but I believe, similar to like an old conversation I had a long time ago about wanting to make Deadpool PG-13. It's not Deadpool at that point. Dark Sun is not Dark Sun if you don't add in the racial diversity, the grit, the crunch, the offensive stuff. So we'll see how that goes. But they're releasing Thri-kreen out here for us to delve into and see what we think. What else? There is also going to be released next year a cameo appearance. So the entire product isn't going to come out yet, but they're going to release like a trailer, if you will, for a 3rd D&D setting. And then in 2023, so 2 years from now, coming up on a year and a half from now, because we're almost done with 2021. That went quick. There's going to be a 4th classic setting released. Now, looking forward in that video, if you look back at the official D&D YouTube channel where they talk about what's on the horizon for D&D, which is where I got all this info from, Chris Perkins towards the end did say, looking forward, there are going to be 2 settings that have never been seen before. They are early in development, so obviously there's no word coming out on what they are. They're brand new, so there's not like there isn't like a, what do you call it? A launch point, if you will, or like a touchstone that they can say it's based on it's entirely new stuff. So we are next year getting 2 new released settings, 2 classic settings re-released for 5th edition, hinting at Spelljammer and Dark Sun. We're getting a cameo on a 3rd one, and then there's something entirely new coming. So we've got some brand new IP, right? Think of back when at BlizzCon, Blizzard announced Overwatch. Whole new world, whole new setting, right? Not Warcraft, not StarCraft, not Diablo, okay? So that was the little snippet on D&D exploring the multiverse. I like it. I'm a fan, especially if they leave Dark Sun and they leave it in the theme and vibe that I believe it should be. If they can wrangle through that, I'm a fan. But I'm always a fan of new settings, okay? They talked about an influx of new players, inviting new players, but also listening to veterans. They leaned into some stuff that was already found in Wild Beyond the Witchlight, where your ability to overcome entire adventures, story arcs, and conflict without resorting to violence. I like that, because you get away from the wonkiness of the CR system, which they do seem to be addressing. How many videos have I made on the shit and the suck that is the encounter system in 5e D&D? But I like that they might be leaning into, or they are leaning into, how to overcome conflict, obstacles, entire adventures, not just like a single interaction with one NPC or one monster. Entire story arcs, how to overcome that without having to roll initiative. So does that mean they're leaning into skill use a lot more and skill challenges and the role play of it all, right? So I like that they're offering little blurbs and paragraphs, chapters, entire tables and charts that the DMs can pull from. See, as a veteran DM, I can do that anyway, right? I can handle any situation I want without rolling initiative because I've got a lot of veteran role players at my table, and as a dungeon master, I've played enough editions that weren't so combat centric. You know, 1st and 2nd edition D&D that were nothing like 4th and 5th, that I know how to weave through conversation at the table and say, yeah, that was enough for you to warrant overcoming this monster, and I'm going to give you EXP for it, but there was never any, you never actually rolled a hit. But I like when they're going into that territory, because what it does is it gives some possible guidance for newer players to show that there's more than one way to accomplish this objective. So I like that. And as mentioned, they've already done that with Wild Beyond the Witchlight. I don't remember reading through those little details on it, but they've already done that. So they're going to be leaning into that a lot more with the new content that they're going to be releasing. I like that they talk about it's very heavily community driven. Just getting feedback from new players, people that are new to the hobby, and then veteran role players as well. Like, what do you as players and dungeon masters playing our game, what do you guys like? What do you want to see? So I like that they're taking that, funneling it through their skill set as designers and official writers and creators, and figuring out what goes in the books. Obviously, as a business, they're going to decide ultimately what goes in the book and what's omitted and so on. But I like that approach. They are definitely talking about, and Chris Perkins did reiterate this when they asked sort of the final question of where do you see D&D in the future? They are going to be releasing a lot more anthologies. So kind of like the stuff found in Candlekeep Adventures or Candlekeep Mysteries. Players and DMs were talking very highly about, they like that short adventure stuff, right? I feel like there's a lot that leans into that anyway with the world, how it's been in the last 5 years of, 10 years. Everything is at your fingertips, convenient. I don't have a lot of time. I need to be able to play video games and get something out of it for playing an hour without investing 10 hours. So therefore, it follows suit that D&D is going to appeal to those that just want to play the game for 3 to 6 sessions and get something done from beginning, middle, and end, right? So I like that they are releasing more anthologies. And combining that with all the settings that are being released, you kind of have both. You have those quick snippets of 1 to 7 session gameplay, and then you have entire campaign content. This is a big one. There are going to be new core rulebooks released in 2024. So the new DMG Monster Manual Player's Handbook. They did not say whether that's going to be like a 6th edition. It sounds like it's all still 5e, because the person that announced this on that video did say these new core rulebooks released in 3 years will be completely compatible with all current 5th edition books. So therefore, is that saying it's a 5.5 or a 6th edition? I doubt it. It's just a rehash or rework, incorporating the new direction they want to take, and perhaps, throwing in the errata and whatnot and making the changes sort of stamped and final in official books. But if you want to go by those new books, that means you're buying, most likely, a new player's handbook, a new TMG, and a new monster manual in D&D Beyond and at your local gaming store. This is a big one. There is a new monster book coming out called Monsters of the Multiverse. It is a treasure trove of creature-related material that appeared in previous 5th edition material. So it's kind of taking a lot of stuff that's already been out there, bundling it into one cohesive package and putting it into one book. Okay? It's an updated monster book of previously released monsters. It is a one-stop shop for monsters and playable races with over 250 monsters. I don't want to say new, but perhaps in the presentation, the artwork, and the new stat blocks, which they did release some little snippets that are hard to read through, I think on purpose. They're kind of blurry, almost like 144p resolution of the new layout of stat blocks and the things that are now gone from what you might find in your monster manual. But 250 monsters and over 30 playable races. And these are all playable races outside of the player's handbook that are setting agnostic. So it's the, as Jeremy Crawford said, it's the most playable races put into one single book. So it's kind of taking everything that's in there, or that's been released, monsters and races, chunking it all into one book called Monsters of the Multiverse. And therefore, the title indicates the multiverse, that these are things that work throughout all of D&D settings, right? In any, whether you want to keep in Eberron, you want to play in Wildmount, play in the new Dark Sun or Spelljam or whatever, okay? You're going to get familiar art, but you're also going to get new art. Now, when is this book going to be available? I think, if I remember right, the exact date was given of January 25th. There's going to be a new gift set that's released, which has 3 books. It's going to have Tasha's, Xanathar's, and this new Monsters of the Multiverse book. So that's the soonest that you're going to be able to get this, is January 25th. This Monsters of the Multiverse book will be released as a standalone book later on in the year, okay? But if you want it early, you're going to have to get it with the gift set, which has Tasha's and Xanathar's. And though there's some new artwork and stuff like that, at least on the front cover, I believe, like new alternate art, I don't know that they gave any information of whether the content in those 2 books, Tasha's and Xanathar's, is anything different. So if you want Monsters of the Multiverse January 25th, like beginning of the year, you're going to be getting 2 books that you most likely already have. But it is going to be released as a standalone book a bit later on. The other thing that's going to be happening in that book is all monsters are now alphabetized. So Glabrezu, for example, it's now under G, which means that you no longer have to remember that a Glabrezu is a demon. And therefore you look in the demon section and then alphabetize and find G, right? And the reason why they talked about doing that is you'll see a lot of other books that will reference, go ahead and throw a Lamassu into the game and a Death Slad into the game, or throw an imp. Now you can look at I and find imp. You don't have to know whether an imp is a devil or a demon. You know what I mean? So it's all just alphabetized. One thing that they did, and they're already sort of releasing little snippets and stat blocks of this that reveal it, but you're going to find this in all the monsters in the Monsters of the Multiverse, and therefore I think all subsequent monster books that may release in the future. Spells and how they're listed on a NPCs or a creature stat block have changed a lot. A lot. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over. There is another little article, a PDF, I think, that you can go to on the official Wizards of the Coast D&D website, and it's called Creature Evolutions. This is sort of the new layout and the new way they're going with these stat blocks. So you have these stat blocks refinements. Over the past year or so, we've been refining the D&D stat block to make it easier to use and to improve how DM-controlled creatures function and play. The following sections describe the main changes we've made. You can find these changes already in Wild Beyond the Witchlight and coming up in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons and the Strixhaven book that's coming up. And, of course, as I've mentioned, in the new Monsters of the Multiverse book. What are the changes? Well, creature type. Creature types are now always capitalized. We've made it so that it's easier to tell in the rules when we're talking about a monster of a certain type, like giants or undead or whatever. We've also gotten strict about which monsters get the humanoid creature type. This type is now reserved for creatures who are human-like in their moral culture and cultural range. As we update older books, we'll reassign some humanoids to other creature types. Alignment is kind of left sort of ambiguous, in a way. Only named individuals, such as like from the Wild Beyond the Witchlight, Mr. Witch, Mr. Light, they have a definite alignment. Otherwise, generic humanoids now bear the words any alignment, reminding the DM that such people have vast moral ranges. Magical creatures that have a very strong moral inclination, for example, angels, demons, devils, undead, they now have an alignment preceded by the word typically. For example, a demon stat block says typically chaotic evil, since it's typical for a demon to be chaotic evil in D&D. That one word typically reminds the DM that the alignment is a narrative suggestion. It isn't an existential absolute. The holy can fall, and the fiendish can rise. Members of certain organizations, charitable knighthoods, and diabolical cults sometimes get the typical alignment stat or label. I like that, right? Eberron does a really good job, Keith Baker, of leaving things ambiguous. Like, just because it's a red dragon, there may be a typical attribute to it, but they may be the friendly dragon and the gold dragon may be the asshole of your world. So I like that because it's always been so ambiguous anyway that especially new players, they come in and kind of feel like, how does this work? Like, I don't understand. What is chaotic? What's the difference from chaotic evil to neutral evil to lawful evil to chaotic you get it, right? So I feel like it's not blatantly just doing away with alignment entirely, but at least giving a little more guidance towards how DMs might weave through that. So that's really cool. Tags. Worry about that later. Proficiency bonus is used so much to weave through all of the different options that players are going to have when you're dealing with a monster, like your attack value and all this stuff, that now proficiency bonus is listed right next to the CR. Here's the big ones. Bonus actions. If a creature has any bonus actions, they now appear in the section called bonus actions. It's just easier to weave through the stat block so that when you're controlling the monster, you know what it can do as a reaction, what it can do as a bonus action, and what it's doing as its main action. Leaning into that much more heavily is the way they're using spellcasting now. Spellcasting is now an action that appears in the action section of a stat block. The spellcasting action doesn't use spell slots. A creature can cast the action spells a certain number of times per day. I believe I've even seen things that list it at will, which kind of reminds us back of 4th edition D&D. So it'll tell you how often you can do it, but there's no more slots. So DMs no longer have to track spell slots. The unwieldy tons of bookwork that a DM had to deal with a spellcasting monster NPC is really being removed, and I like that a lot because what I've done already anyway is when I bring a spellcaster to the table and I want to use them as a monster, I take little snippets and I take the gist of what they're trying to do. But oftentimes when it's my turn with that monster, I'm still looking through going, okay, what spell do I want to cast? And okay, how many slots does, you know what I mean? And I feel like it's really condensing that down, but still making it viable. The only spells that now appear in the spellcasting action are ones that take an action to cast. If a spell requires a bonus action, reaction, or a minute or more, that spell must appear elsewhere in the stat block. This change ensures that bonus actions and reactions, such as Misty Step and Shield, aren't hiding somewhere within the spell list. So when you see a spellcaster that has the Shield ability, looking in its reactions, you'll see Shield and what it does. You're now chunking these spellcasting things into something that doesn't use spell slots. I'm thinking about how that plays into Counterspell, which was a thing anyway because so many monsters have innate spellcasting. You can't perceive that they're casting a spell. Therefore, you can't counterspell what it's going to do. So I really like that a lot. And it talks about how it's adding mostly their spells are more like utility, out of combat utility stuff, but these are actions it can do. Whereas if you take something that is a huge attribute of like attack, an offensive ability, like one of the key components of this wizard is the ability to just fireball. It says here, we're more selective about which spells appear in a stat block, focusing on spells that have non-combat utility. But a magic using monster's most potent firepower is now usually represented by a special magic action rather than relying on spells. So if that wizard has fireball, and I think one of the examples was a war priest with like one moment. I'm dying here. A war priest with like the ability called Holy Fire. Instead of it being a spell, it now just has an action, Holy Fire, and it details everything that does. Whereas your spells, which are listed under actions, bonus actions, or reactions, might be things like Misty Step as a bonus action, or Shield as a reaction, and so on. So I really like the way it handles that. Ability score increases. This is a big one. New character races that are being released. So the ones I said there was 30 races that are being rehashed and worked through in Monsters of the Multiverse, but in subsequent material where we have a new race, perhaps in one of these new settings, new character races do not have ability score increases like you've seen already in the player's handbook. The new races now instead rely on a special character creation rule that allows a character to increase one ability score by 2 and another by 1, or 3 of your choice by 1. The lack of the ability score increase trait helps make your choice of race and your choice of class independent from each other, broadening the types of characters we're likely to see at the game table. Age is now, first off, on that ability score increase, I don't like that. Not a fan. I get it. I can definitely step on some toes. Let's include everyone. Let's make it all equal. It's not equal. It's not. The world isn't. And I know here's a chance that we can make it all equal. But I don't see a problem with aspects of the world being equal. I'm not talking about excluding people because of race, creed, religion, culture, all that. No, I'm talking about the fact that keep weight classes in Olympic. I'm an athlete guy, right? I'm a sports dude. Keep weight classes in Olympic weightlifting. The big guys should not be competing with the little guys. Okay? Keep track and field separate. There's a world record for the men's 400 meters and the women's 400 meters, and they are not the same. They should never be the same. Okay? I have a lot of personal experience with this and people I've coached and trained where, I don't want to get into it, but, transgender athletes that are born as a boy, as a male, and then they start competing in female, they're destroying everybody. It's bullshit. It's not fair. Okay? But I'm going to get off my soapbox. I don't like that whole make them all the same. Orcs and halflings should, stat block-wise, not be the same when you're playing barbarians. I don't give a damn how you were raised as a halfling and how you grew up. It just should not be the same. But I think there's a lot of value in role-playing a halfling barbarian and overcoming the fact that an orc or a Goliath might have on paper been a better choice. But that's not to say that the halfling barbarian cannot bring more value to the group, to the table, to the game, and also make that player a better role player. You're starting to have the numbers dictate a little bit too much for you. Let the human beings at the table figure out how to overcome. That's where strength is built. That's how you become a better player. By dealing with the negative shit that's thrown at you, and how you still weave that into your character and still bring excitement to the table. So I'm not a big fan of that at all. That's already kind of talked about in Tasha's, the lineage stuff. You will not find that in my new Silver Rot World book coming up, and that will not ever apply at my table, even if that is the new way to do things in the new release player's handbook. Again, my opinion, but also going back, we to this day, doesn't matter what's already been released, we all have the right at our table to decide. Even though an official designer wrote it, one of my players has said best when he was the DM in his house rules. He says, the number one thing I want you guys to know is I have the authority as dungeon master at our table to disagree with anything you guys say, including, and more importantly, disagreeing with something that the official designers have said. Work with what fits your table best. And in my case, I'll leave that one alone. You know how I stand on it. Age is now going to be sort of gone. It's just the typical lifespan of a PC in the D&D multiverse is about a century, assuming the character doesn't meet a violent end on an adventure. Members of some races, such as dwarves and elves, can live for centuries. It leaves it as that. I like that. I don't think you need to deal with, what's its skin color, hair color, eye color, blah, blah, blah. Alignment. Previously, the text of a character race suggested an alignment for your character. Newer races contain no such alignment suggestions, since a character's alignment is entirely under the purview of the player. I love that. Very good. Size. Some new races, including the Harengon, which I think are those rabbit people, let you choose whether your character starts medium or small, reflecting the fact that some races contain an especially broad range of builds. I love that. You'll see this choice in other races in the future. Okay? Also, rather than suggesting height and weight, we provide the following text. Player characters, regardless of race, typically fall into the same ranges of height and weight that humans have in our world. If you'd like to determine your character's height or weight randomly, consult the table. Otherwise, do it how you want. I love that. Leave it like that, though. Don't attach a number to it now. Therefore, you want to play a really small orc. Malnourished, different culture, raised differently, right? They didn't crossbreed and build the grandest grunting Warhammer, Warcraft orcs. You want to play a small orc. But leave the stat blocks where the stat blocks are, okay? Languages. New characters now start knowing Common and one other language that you and your DM agree upon that's appropriate for the character. I like that because that fits within each world and the story of where you grew up and whatnot, okay? Just because you're a dwarf doesn't mean you know Dwarven. You know Common because that's always the overriding one that just helps remove a lot of hiccups when you're role-playing because you at least can communicate, right? I've played in games where a character's like, I don't want to speak Common. I want to be so edgy and different that I speak all these other languages but not Common. And it just became, oh, by the way, everything that dude just said, you don't know he just said all that because you didn't understand him. Or, oh, you don't have comprehend languages up? You can't read any of that shit. So it feels like, it's like a little stopgap at the table. So Common is always the good universal. But then I like that. I was never around a dwarf. I got plucked, Willow style. They threw me in a wicker basket and shoved me down the river, and I was raised by orcs. Therefore, I speak Orcish. I don't speak Dwarven. I like that. That's it for that. So that's kind of where they're going. Looking forward, as I said, Chris Perkins said that there's going to be those 2 new settings, early in development, that are coming up, upwards of 2024, 3-4 years from now. And a lot more anthologies, the short adventures like found in Candlekeep Mysteries. So that's blurby enough. I'm getting hungry. I'll see you guys soon.